You have been giving away your power every time you stayed where you were not valued. Every time someone disrespected you and you remained there hoping things would change, you surrendered a piece of your authority. Every time you explained yourself to people who had already decided not to understand you, you handed them control over your dignity. And the tragedy is this: you thought staying proved strength. You thought patience proved loyalty. You thought endurance proved character. But the world does not reward the man who refuses to leave the table where he is not respected. The world rewards the man who knows exactly when to stand up and walk away. Most men never learn this lesson. They believe that effort earns respect. They believe that proving themselves long enough will eventually change how people treat them. They believe that if they just try harder, explain better, give more, tolerate more, sacrifice more, then one day the people around them will finally recognize their value. But Machiavelli saw through this illusion centuries ago. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life observing power, not the romanticized version of power that philosophers like to imagine, but the brutal, cold mechanics of how human beings actually behave. He watched princes, rulers, generals, and ambitious men rise and fall. He watched loyalty collapse under pressure. He watched friendships turn into betrayals. And from these observations, he discovered a truth most men never realize. Respect is rarely given to the man who stays. Respect is given to the man who can leave. The man who cannot walk away is not respected. He is tolerated, used, managed, controlled. People instinctively sense when someone lacks the courage to remove themselves from a situation. And when they sense that weakness, they exploit it. But the moment a man becomes capable of leaving, everything changes. Because walking away is not just an action, it is a psychological signal. It tells the world that you are not desperate. It tells the world that your value does not depend on someone else's approval. It tells the world that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. And human beings respond to this signal immediately. Here is something uncomfortable that most men must accept. People do not chase what is always available. They chase what can disappear. Scarcity creates desire. Abundance creates indifference. If you are always there, always responding, always forgiving, always explaining, always waiting, people begin to treat you like background noise. Your presence becomes predictable. Your attention becomes cheap. Your energy becomes something they assume they can access whenever they want. But when you walk away, something strange happens inside the human mind. The brain begins to panic. Psychologists call this loss aversion. The human mind reacts far more strongly to losing something than to gaining something. And when someone who was always present suddenly removes themselves, the brain experiences it like a missing piece of reality. They begin to ask questions. Why did he leave? What changed? Did I go too far? Does he no longer need me? And suddenly, the person who once took you for granted begins thinking about you more than ever before. This is the silent power of walking away. Machiavelli understood that power often comes not from what you do, but from what you refuse to tolerate. A prince who endures endless disrespect becomes weak in the eyes of his court. A prince who allows enemies to insult him without consequence loses authority. But the prince who removes himself from situations that undermine him becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability creates power, because the world fears what it cannot control. And nothing is harder to control than a man who is willing to leave. Think about how most people behave when conflict appears. Someone insults them, and they argue. Someone disrespects them, and they defend themselves. Someone undervalues them, and they try harder to prove their worth. They believe that fighting for respect will earn respect. But the opposite is usually true. When you argue for respect, you signal that you are afraid of losing it. When you defend your value, you signal that you doubt it yourself. When you stay in places where you are constantly disrespected, you teach people that your boundaries do not exist. And once people learn that your boundaries are negotiable, they will push them endlessly. This is why the most powerful response is often the quietest one. You leave. No dramatic speeches, no emotional explanations, no attempts to prove a point, just absence. And absence is a language the human mind understands immediately. When you walk away calmly, without rage or desperation, people begin to feel something they cannot easily explain. It is not anger. It is not sadness. It is uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable states a human being can experience. The brain constantly seeks closure. It wants answers, explanations, finality. But when someone leaves without drama, without explanation, without begging for resolution, the mind cannot close the loop. And when the mind cannot close the loop, it obsesses. They replay conversations. They rethink every interaction. They wonder if they misjudged you. They begin to question their own behavior. The person who once ignored your presence now becomes hyper-aware of your absence. And this is where the shift begins. You see, walking away does something far deeper than create mystery. It shifts the entire power dynamic of the relationship. Before you left, you were the one seeking resolution. After you leave, they become the one seeking answers. Before you left, you were the one trying to maintain the connection. After you leave, they become the one trying to restore it. The roles reverse. And this reversal is the foundation of psychological leverage. But here is the critical detail most men misunderstand. Walking away only works when it is real. Many men attempt to pretend they are leaving. They announce it. They threaten it. They use it as a tactic to manipulate people into chasing them. But threats reveal desperation. When someone senses that you are bluffing, your power collapses instantly. True walking away contains no performance. It is quiet, decisive, final. The man who truly walks away does not care if anyone follows him. He does not leave to provoke a reaction. He leaves because his standards require it. And paradoxically, that is precisely what causes people to chase him. Because the rarest man in the modern world is the man who does not negotiate his self-respect. Most people will tolerate disrespect if the reward is large enough. They will remain in toxic relationships for years. They will stay in environments that diminish them. They will compromise their dignity in exchange for comfort, attention, or approval. But the man who refuses to do this becomes something unusual. He becomes difficult to replace. When you walk away from situations that drain your value, you send a message louder than any argument. You communicate that your presence is conditional on respect. You communicate that access to you must be earned. You communicate that you are willing to lose connections in order to keep your dignity intact, and the world notices this immediately. Because dignity is magnetic. People are drawn to those who cannot be easily controlled. But there is an even deeper layer to this strategy, one Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. Walking away forces people to reveal their true intentions. When you stay, people can continue taking advantage of you without consequence. When you argue, they can continue manipulating you emotionally, but when you leave, the mask falls. Some will let you go without resistance. Those people were never invested in you. Others will suddenly attempt to pull you back. Those people benefited from your presence more than they admitted. And a few, a very small number, will chase you with genuine respect. Those are the only people who deserve a place in your life. Walking away is not just about power. It is about clarity. It separates those who value you from those who simply used your availability. But mastering this requires something most men struggle with: emotional discipline. Because walking away challenges the deepest fears of the human psyche. Fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of losing connection, fear of uncertainty. These fears trap men in situations that quietly destroy their confidence over time. They remain where they are not respected because leaving feels risky. But Machiavelli would tell you something brutally honest. Remaining where you are disrespected is the greatest risk of all. Because every day you stay in such an environment, you slowly train the world to see you as someone who tolerates less than he deserves. And once the world learns that lesson, it will repeat it endlessly. This is why the most powerful men in history mastered the art of strategic withdrawal. They knew when to fight. They knew when to negotiate. And most importantly, they knew when to walk away, because the man who cannot leave a situation is already trapped inside it. But the man who can walk away calmly, without hesitation, without fear, is the man the world eventually begins to chase. The moment you walk away without hesitation, something subtle but powerful begins to happen in the minds of the people you leave behind. They expected resistance. They expected emotion. They expected negotiation. But what they did not expect was calm detachment. And when the human mind encounters behavior it cannot predict, it becomes restless. Most people operate on emotional patterns. They know how arguments unfold. They know how apologies are negotiated. They know how manipulation works. But when a man simply removes himself without drama, the script collapses. The familiar pattern disappears, and the brain hates unfinished stories. This is why silence after departure becomes a weapon. Machiavelli understood that power often lies not in confrontation, but in absence. When a prince vanished from the center of conflict, the court began to whisper, advisors began to speculate, rivals began to worry. Because absence creates imagination, and imagination is far more powerful than explanation. When you explain your departure, you reduce its impact. Your reasons become something people can debate, criticize, or dismiss. But when you leave without explanation, the meaning of your departure becomes something they must invent themselves. And the human mind rarely invents flattering explanations. They begin to wonder if they miscalculated. They begin to question whether they underestimated your value. They begin to suspect that your silence hides something they cannot see. Suddenly, the same person who once felt comfortable ignoring you begins to feel uncomfortable ignoring your absence. This is psychological inversion. Before you walked away, they believed you needed the connection more than they did. They believed your presence was permanent. They believed your tolerance was endless. But the moment you remove yourself, the entire equation changes. Now they must ask a question they never considered before. What if he never comes back? This is the moment where curiosity turns into pursuit. The human brain is drawn toward unfinished loops. When something disappears without closure, the mind begins to chase resolution. This is why unsent messages linger in our thoughts. This is why unanswered questions keep people awake at night. And when you walk away cleanly, you become one of those unresolved questions. They begin replaying interactions in their mind. Every conversation becomes evidence. Every moment becomes a clue. They look for the exact moment they lost you. And the irony is this: the less you say, the more they think about you. Words create clarity. Silence creates mystery. And mystery is one of the strongest psychological magnets in existence. Most men destroy this effect because they cannot tolerate silence. They leave, but then they return to explain themselves. They send long messages describing their feelings. They attempt to make the other person understand why they left. In doing so, they give away the power their departure created. The moment you begin explaining yourself, the mystery disappears. The pursuit ends. The other person regains emotional control because the situation becomes predictable again. But the man who truly understands Machiavellian psychology does something different. He walks away and becomes unreachable, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with calm indifference. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because walking away is not only about changing how others see you, it is about changing how you see yourself. The moment you leave a place where you were undervalued, you send a signal to your own mind. You prove to yourself that your standards are real. You demonstrate that your dignity is not negotiable. Self-respect grows through action, not intention. Every time you tolerate disrespect, your confidence weakens. Your mind quietly registers the compromise. It learns that your boundaries are flexible. It learns that your comfort matters less than the approval of others. But when you walk away, something inside you hardens. You realize that losing access to people who undervalue you is not a loss at all. It is a correction. And once your mind understands this truth, your behavior changes permanently. You begin observing people more carefully. You begin recognizing subtle signs of disrespect earlier. You begin protecting your time, your attention, and your energy with precision. Machiavelli would call this the development of virtù, the internal strength that allows a man to shape circumstances rather than be shaped by them. Virtù is not aggression. It is self-command. It is the ability to step away from situations that weaken you before they have the chance to destroy you. Most men lack this ability because they confuse attachment with loyalty. They believe staying proves commitment. They believe enduring mistreatment proves strength. But endurance without respect is not strength. It is surrender. And the world quietly punishes those who surrender their dignity. Look closely at the social dynamics around you, and you will notice something interesting. The individuals who command the most respect are rarely the ones who argue the most. They are rarely the ones who defend themselves constantly. They are rarely the ones who try hardest to maintain every connection. They are the ones who appear comfortable leaving. They give their attention selectively. They invest their time carefully. And when a situation begins to undermine their standards, they disengage without hesitation. This behavior sends a powerful social signal. It communicates that their value is not dependent on any single relationship, opportunity, or environment. And independence is intimidating. People instinctively respect individuals who cannot be easily trapped by circumstances. They respect those who are capable of walking away because it demonstrates something rare: internal stability. A man who can leave without fear is a man who cannot be manipulated. Manipulation requires leverage. It requires emotional dependency. It requires the belief that the other person needs something from you. But when someone realizes that you are fully capable of disappearing from their life without hesitation, their leverage disappears instantly. This is why walking away is often the fastest way to change how people treat you. It removes the illusion of control. The moment people realize they cannot rely on your constant presence, they begin adjusting their behavior. Some will attempt to regain your attention through respect. Others will attempt to regain control through guilt, and a few will simply reveal their indifference. Each reaction gives you information. And information is the currency of strategic living. Machiavelli believed that understanding human behavior was the foundation of power. A prince who misunderstood the motives of those around him would eventually be betrayed. But a prince who carefully observed how people reacted to his decisions could predict their future actions with frightening accuracy. Walking away creates one of the clearest psychological tests available. It reveals who values you. It reveals who needs you. And it reveals who never cared in the first place. But there is an even deeper lesson hidden within this strategy. Walking away forces you to confront a difficult truth about yourself. You begin to realize how many situations you remained in purely out of habit. How many conversations you tolerated out of politeness. How many relationships you maintained out of fear. And once you see these patterns clearly, something shifts inside your mind. You begin to recognize that most of the stress in your life was never imposed on you. It was accepted by you. The moment you realize this, your perspective changes completely. You stop asking how to fix people. You start asking whether they deserve your presence at all. And that question alone will transform your life more than any argument ever could, because the man who truly understands his value does not fight to be appreciated. He simply walks away from those who fail to appreciate him. And in doing so, he forces the world to make a decision: respect him or watch him disappear. Now, here is the part most men fail to understand. Walking away is only the beginning. What happens next determines whether people chase you or forget you entirely. Walking away creates distance, but distance alone is not power. What you become after you leave is what determines whether people chase you or forget you. Most men make a critical mistake after they walk away. They leave physically, but mentally they remain trapped in the same place. They check messages constantly. They replay conversations in their minds. They secretly hope the other person will notice their absence and rush to fix everything. But desperation has a scent, and people can feel it even through silence. Machiavelli understood that true power requires emotional separation, not just physical departure. A prince who withdraws but still obsesses over the opinions of his enemies remains vulnerable. But the prince who moves forward without looking back becomes impossible to manipulate. This is the final discipline of walking away. You do not wait. You do not watch. You do not linger near the door, hoping someone will call you back. You continue walking, because the man who keeps moving becomes something rare in the modern world. Unpredictable. And unpredictability generates gravity. When someone leaves and immediately builds a stronger life, the psychological effect multiplies. The absence becomes louder. The mystery becomes deeper. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. People begin to notice the shift. The man who once tolerated disrespect now moves with quiet certainty. The man who once explained himself endlessly now speaks only when necessary. The man who once stayed in situations that drained him now protects his time like a king protects his throne. This transformation sends a signal that cannot be faked. It tells the world that your departure was not emotional. It was intentional. And intention is attractive. Human beings are drawn to individuals who appear internally directed, those who do not drift with the opinions of others, those who do not bend their standards for approval, those who walk with the calm confidence of someone who knows exactly where he is going. When you become that man, something fascinating happens. The same people who once ignored you begin watching you. The same people who once took you for granted begin noticing your absence. The same people who once believed you would always remain within reach begin realizing they misjudged you completely. This is when the chasing begins, but it rarely looks dramatic. It appears in subtle ways. A message that seems casual but arrives after weeks of silence. A sudden attempt to reconnect through mutual friends. An unexpected compliment from someone who once criticized you. These are not coincidences. They are signals. Signals that your absence created curiosity. Signals that your departure created doubt. Signals that your independence created respect. But here is the final test of your transformation. When people begin chasing you again, you must remember why you walked away in the first place. Many men fail at this moment. The moment they feel attention returning, they become the same person they used to be. They rush back into old dynamics. They lower their standards. They allow the same patterns to repeat. And the power disappears instantly, Because walking away is not a tactic, it is a standard. You did not leave to make someone chase you. You left because your dignity required it. If someone returns with genuine respect, you may choose to open the door again. But if they return with the same behavior that made you leave, the door remains closed. This is the final lesson Machiavelli would give you. Power is not about forcing people to pursue you. Power is about becoming someone who no longer needs to pursue anyone. When you reach that state, the world begins to reorganize itself around you. People who value you will step forward. People who do not will fall away naturally, and you will no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your worth, because your actions already speak louder than any explanation ever could. You walked away without noise. You continued forward without hesitation. You built a life that does not depend on anyone's validation, and in doing so, you discovered the secret most men spend their entire lives chasing. The man who can walk away calmly is the man the world eventually runs after. If this awakens something in you, understand this. The world respects the man who respects himself first. Most men will hear these truths and go back to the same habits tomorrow, but a few will change the way they move forever. If you are one of the few who refuses to be controlled, manipulated, or disrespected again, subscribe to the channel. Because here we study the psychology of power, strategy, and mastery that separates ordinary men from the ones the world cannot ignore.